We've got over 100, this says 100, but we've got 150 partners now on the Everybody Walk campaign, all of us like-minded organizations joining in to promote walking across all sectors of society. It actually then, not long after we launched, morphed into a television show called City Walk that takes cameras around the country and examines interesting walking spots at various large cities around the United States. Well, this television show has been a smashing success. It reaches over 50 million households in Los Angeles through a local affiliate, KCET, but it's also been viewed over 2.5 million times on Hulu, Link TV, and on the kcet.org website. So if you haven't checked out City Walk, I would encourage you to do so, and the inspiration behind that has been the Everybody Walk initiative. And in fact, our Kaiser Permanente float in the 2012 Rose Bowl Parade, the theme was Everybody Walk, and it actually won one of the prestigious awards for creativity and putting forth a message that was very conducive to a healthy lifestyle in the general public. And this sort of culminated in a feature film, a 30-minute documentary called The Walking Revolution, and you can watch this online as well. We may even have some copies being distributed this week at the meeting. But this is a great documentary film that features a host of American College of Sports Medicine leaders talking about the health benefits of walking and how we can promote it. Now, the beauty of practicing in Southern California at Kaiser Permanente is we were able to enlist the help of some of our patients to promote the idea that walking is medicine and how everybody needs to walk. And I want to show you a clip that we put together to promote the idea that everybody should walk. You may recognize Allison Janney in that. She's the voice of our Kaiser Permanente television ads. And so now I'd like to bring up my friend and Kaiser Permanente colleague, Dr. Phil Tussaud. Phil is a nephrologist at Kaiser, a longtime Kaiser doctor like myself, and heads up as our national clinical lead for total health. You know, at Kaiser Permanente, we realize that if our patients live in a toxic environment, if they don't have good food sources, if they're not active, if they smoke, our chances of being successful and keeping them healthy are really minuscule. And so Phil's been tasked with doing that, helping us promote healthy lifestyles to our patients. So Phil, would you please come up, and he's going to talk about the idea of the walking challenge, which really was his.
Well, thanks, Bob. It's hard to top that little video we just saw. I'd like to talk to you today about a social movement, taking this one step further, a social movement called Total Health. A social movement designed to heal people, heal communities, and heal America by healthy eating and active living. Now, all great social movements have a great public story, and all great public stories have three elements. 1, a story of now. 2, a story of self. And 3, a story of us. The story of now is the story of our healthcare crisis, where we spend $3 trillion a year on healthcare, where we spend $1 trillion a year treating preventable diseases, which by definition are preventable. A healthcare crisis where unless we change our behavior, 1 out of 3 of our children will grow up to have diabetes. Now, the story of self is the story of walk the talk. It's the story of change self before change others. And the story of us is the story of talk the walk, where we lead the change, where we lead the change effort in our country. And how do we lead change? We lead change by accomplishing 3 goals. 1, by measuring vital signs of health on all our patients. 2, encouraging healthy behaviors like walking. And 3, identify and spread best practices. Now, as a physician, I value vital signs for health, but in 2009, I wasn't very healthy. At that time, I was obese, my BMI was 34, and I didn't exercise. But I heard about Bob and the Everybody Walk campaign, and I started to walk, and then I started to jog, then I started to run, and now I run half marathons. In addition, I heard about plant-based nutrition and started eating more fruits and vegetables, and eventually lost 30 pounds. Now, Kaiser Permanente values vital signs of health, And in 2011, we started measuring exercise as a vital sign. And what did we learn? Well, we learned, one, that measuring exercise rates by itself does not increase exercise rates. And number two, we learned that sensor-based systems are a great way to track activity. Number three, we learned that areas with high obesity rates within our population have low exercise rates, and areas with low obesity rates have high exercise rates. And number four, we learned that social networking is a great way to increase exercise rates. And finally, and more important, we've learned that long-term group goals is a great way to change behavior. So with this information, I went to Bob and I said, Bob, I want to start a social movement. And Bob very kindly and quietly said, well, tell me more. I said, Bob, I have this big audacious goal that I can't get out of my mind. And he go, what is it? And I go, BMW. And Bob goes, you mean the car? And I know Bob, billion mile walk. And Bob goes, tell me more. And I said, Bob, if we could get just 10,000 doctors in the country to recruit just 250 of their patients to agree to walk 1 mile a day for a year, we could walk 1 billion miles. And I said, then Bob, one step at a time, we would start a social movement. And I said, Bob, one step at a time, we could start to heal America. Thank you for your time.
So that's what we hope you'll come away with, the idea of writing a walking prescription for your patients. And to kick that off, we're going to begin monitoring those ACSM members who signed up with a walking challenge this week. And you may have already picked up a brochure. If not, take a look at the Everybody Walk brochure. You can get extra copies of this in the Everybody Walk booth. And if you provide your name and mailing address, they'll mail you a prescription pad that you can use in clinic to hand to patients to promote walking to your patients. And I wanted to thank Bill Dexter for posing for that picture for the challenge, the walking challenge. That's Bill in training. ACSM was a little worried about liability, so they actually hired a nurse to keep an eye on him during his training walks. But his team, he's captaining one of the teams. These are the team captains for the walking challenge. Each of you have been issued a tractivity monitor that will measure very accurately the steps you were taking. Bill Dexter, Eugene Hong, Mark Hutchinson, Carrie Jaworski, Liz Joy, Bill Roberts, myself, and Angela Smith are going to be the walking captains. We've signed up under this. Each of us have signed up teams, and you'll be able to see the results displayed in the exhibit hall. And here's a mock-up with some predictions of how this challenge is likely to play out. You can see early on, I'm suspecting that I could win big. But you never know. But this is just perhaps how it could pan out. You see Angela Smith there. These orthopedic surgeons are mostly used to just standing all day. Where at Kaiser Permanente, I see about 20 patients an hour, so I'm constantly walking. So I anticipate that training is going to pay off. So I want to end with just a challenge. Everybody Walk is a call to action to get America more active. We know that a healthy doc means a healthy patient. That is, providers who themselves exercise and eat right are more likely to prescribe it to our patients. So with healthy lifestyles, it is essential that we are modeling the behavior we want our patients to do. So I want to let you know that tomorrow morning we will have a kickoff group walk at 7 a.m. We'll meet in Hall WA1 at 7 with your monitor on, and we'll begin our walking. If you haven't picked up a monitor, they're available right at the Everybody Walk booth next to the check-in desk. And this starts today. We're going to announce the winning team at the clinician's reception on Thursday night. We need to create a social movement starting now, and we need to lead it. So thank you very much for attending. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Tim Church, who's going to introduce our first Exercises Medicine keynote speaker. Tim.
When I was asked to introduce Marco a few months ago, they immediately sent me his CV, and I actually got a little bit sad. I looked at it and I thought, wow, the people in this room who don't know Marco, the CV is not going to really tell you who Marco is. So I'm actually going to take a minute or two to tell you who Marco is. I am in a unique position. I split my time between corporate America and academia, and I get to work with some of the most remarkable leaders you could ever hope to work with. And when I think about the list of the best leaders I've ever worked with, this is one of the best. And why do I say that? It's because he's not just a leader, he's a leader of leaders. And that's a gift. It's very hard to lead leaders. And to bring together a whole bunch of highly credentialed, highly established, and occasional highly opinionated researchers and get them at the same table to create a common vision, to get that vision on paper, submit it as a grant twice, and fight and fight and fight and fight, and get it funded twice, and then you get to do the study, is a remarkable achievement. And make no mistake, life was a massive team effort, a huge team effort across this country. But we always knew who our coach was, who our general manager was, who our CEO was, and occasionally who our referee was. And it's a great privilege to be up here representing something that's been 14 years in the making, and to be the one representing the Life team to introduce Dr. Marco Pahor as he rolls out the Life results.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, CSM. Thank you, Steve Blair. Thank you to the entire team. And actually, here are 150 people I am representing here who made the Life study possible. We have investigators throughout the country, and this, as Tim Church has mentioned, is a team effort, and I'm here to represent the entire team. Also, here is our journey. The first idea, first concept for a need of a phase 3 trial in geriatric medicine started in year 2000. Continued the planning grant from 2001-2003, then the pilot study, NIH, before funding a major phase 3 trial, wanted to see evidence that this can really work. Not only that we can deliver participants, that the organization works, that the team works, and ultimately that there is some signal, which I will show you later. Also, given the global funding challenge that the federal government we are facing, it has been a challenge to get the study funded, and after several submissions, multiple reviews, at the end I was almost hopeless that this would not happen. It was my birthday on August 6th that I got a call from NIH. Your study is starting in 2 weeks. And so the funding started in September 2009, randomization 2011, 2010 through 2011, which was complete ahead of schedule. The follow-up completed just last December, and now it's my privilege to present you the main data of the Life study. Also, I want to mention that we are sharing the results, sharing the data, and so the baseline data are available to anyone who makes requests to analyze, and the release of the follow-up data will be available through our data management and coordinating center at Wake Forest University for Dr. Miller in next summer. I would like to spend a few minutes just to talk about why mobility is important in older adults. What is a public health impact? Some preliminary results, primarily from our pilot study, the design of a Life study, our recruitment and baseline characteristics, the main results, safety results, and then what we conclude what are our next steps. Mobility disability in the US is a highly prevalent problem. In US Census 2010, it reported that about almost 24 million older or people living in the community had difficulty walking a quarter of a mile or 400 meters, including over 13 million who could not perform this simple activity. And among individuals aged 65 years and older, living in the community, about 15.2 million, almost actually more than a third of the older population have difficulty in ambulatory activities, of which 11 million of older adults could not perform the activity. Mobility or ambulation is a fundamental feature of functioning across several species. starting from worms, fruit flies, various insects, fish, birds, quadrupeds, bipeds, and humans. It's a fundamental feature for functioning in daily living. Here is a data published a few years ago regarding fruit flies. As fruit flies get older, their mobility of the wings declines. Also in rats, this is studies we conducted several years ago showing that as rats age, their latency to fall from an inclined plane or their swimming speed declines. But most importantly, as rats age, their function declines, but among those who are highly functioning, the survival, you can see the lower curves, the survival of a cohort of rats who are higher performance is greater compared to lower performance. Well, in humans, we've conducted a number of epidemiologic studies, and that's a study we published in JAMA a few years ago looking at performance of older adults living in a community over 400-meter walk and incident mobility limitation. Those who had a lower walking speed or who were unable to walk 400 meters had a higher incidence of mobility limitation over 4 years or 5 years of follow-up. But also, interestingly, their mobility disability was higher and their incidence of cardiovascular disease is an independent risk factor from any other known risk factor of future morbidity, especially cardiovascular morbidity. And both in men and women, those who walk slower had higher mortality as opposed to faster walkers. There is also a major public health impact on healthcare expenditure. And here is a study published a few years ago on a Medicare current beneficiary survey looking at annual cost and total healthcare cost of those who are unable, had difficulty or no difficulty in walking a quarter of a mile. And on the right-hand side, those with, who are unable show almost a 50% higher healthcare cost. In addition, hospitalizations were almost twice as more frequent. Looking at the global evidence from epidemiologic study, a recent meta-analysis looked at created really normograms of walking speed and mortality. So you could predict a person's life expectancy based on age and walking speed. And the thresholds that are commonly used are 1 meter per second or 0.8 meter per second to identify those at high or very high risk of mortality, both for men and for women. So if mobility is such an important factor, what can we do to prevent mobility decline? And there are several studies ongoing at various levels from basic science, phase 1 through phase 3 trials on several pharmacological interventions that are under investigations and several behavioral interventions. But there are two aspects that are most highly promising. Actually, physical activity is on top of the list, and as well as health education. And these are the two on which we will focus today. Before the life study started, there was quite a bit of evidence, and many of you would remember the FAST trial, which was published in JAMA now almost a decade ago since it was completed, looking at health education versus resistance and aerobic exercise, looking at the adjusted disability score, which was highly significant. The study was conducted at Wake Forest University. And, but the p-value was highly significant for resistance and aerobic, showing that both are highly effective in improving disability score. But what does a few decimal points on a disability score mean to people? What does it mean on their daily life? How does it impact, how does it change the way people function? And that's a key question we try to address with a life study. Definitive evidence was lacking. How many times I receive a question, do we need one more exercise study? Well, until you don't have the evidence, you don't have it. And especially in vulnerable older adults, there was equipoise whether people who engage in exercise can really maintain it for longer term, can adhere, and can be safe, and ultimately improve their ultimate outcome as inability to walk, measured as a hard dichotomous outcome. So we reanalyzed a fast trial, look at activities of daily living disability over 18 months, and here again was quite promising in the secondary analysis, where the health education group had a higher incidence of ADL disability as a dichotomous outcome as opposed to aerobic and resistance exercise. But this was not enough to justify a full-scale study costing several $1 million. So the NIH requested to have a pilot study, the LIFE pilot, which was conducted between 2003 and 2006. 400 older adults who are sedentary, at high risk of disability, measured as a simple physical performance score, the SPPB score, the short physical performance battery, which we will hear during the talk many times. It's a simple score. You ask a person to walk 4 meters, measure the speed, ask a person to rise 5 times from a chair, and also simple balance test. Based on quartile distribution of those tests, attribute a score from 0 to 12, where those with 0 cannot do any of the 3 activities, and those with 12 are in the top quartile in the general population of older adults to perform it. Epidemiologic studies have shown that the SPPB score is a strong independent risk factor of future disability, and especially of mobility disability, in several cohorts, in several communities, diverse population. So a highly reliable, reproducible, and valid score for screening, and that's one of the basic concepts that we use for recruitment in the LIFE study. So the pilot showed for the first time, to our knowledge, that the SPPB score, which is a risk factor, can be modified. So 1 point in a yellow line is a physical activity group, gain 1 point. Successful aging also had some benefits. So health education is an active, is not a control, is an active intervention, a comparison intervention. Had a slight improvement, but not as much and not as significant as the physical activity group. So highly promising from a pilot, 400 people, 1 year of follow-up at 4 sites. Walking speed also improved as expected, and it was proved in several other studies. But most importantly, the hard outcome we are looking at is the inability to walk 400 meters, which was also tended to be higher in the successful aging group or health education group as opposed to the physical activity. This was highly promising, not statistically significant as it was a pilot, so as it was expected. But this was a fundamental data which convinced NIH and the various reviewers to support the funding of a LIFE study. And here is a design, a basic design. The LIFE study stands for Lifestyle Interventions and Independence for Elders. And the key question we wanted to answer is a structured physical activity or a health education program more effective in reducing the risk of major mobility disability in older persons? And here is a basic design. It's a multi-center, single-blinded, so the assessors were not knowing the assignment of randomization intervention assignment of whoever they were assessing. Parallel randomized trial. We had 8 field centers throughout the US, Stanford in California, Northwestern in Chicago, Tufts University in Boston, Yale University in New Haven, Pittsburgh University in Pittsburgh, Wake Forest in North Carolina, which also had the data coordinating and management at Quality Control Center, Florida, in Gainsville, University of Florida, and in Jacksonville, the Brooks Rehabilitation Center. And Florida was also the administrative coordinating center, and Pennington were led by Dr. Church, we just heard a few minutes ago. So the duration was 4 years totally, from February 2010 through December 2013. How we position the LIFE study compared to the existing knowledge. So this slide kind of summarizes. On the x-axis, there is a duration of intervention in weeks. On the y-axis, the age of the participants. The diameter of the disc shows you the sample size of a cohort, And there is one other factor that doesn't appear here, how frail, how vulnerable is the population. If you look at life studies on the top right up corner, showing it's one of the oldest population, longest duration, and it's also a very frail, highly vulnerable population. Inclusion criteria included men and women 70 to 89 who were sedentary, but were able to walk for 100 meters, but had a short physical performance battery score, as I mentioned earlier, 9 or below, but also needed to have a group of 45% of the participants below 8, which means that we would avoid the healthy cohort effect. Say if you say, I want to recruit people 9 or below, all you'll get is people 8 and 9s, and you will miss the more frail participants, which was a key goal of this study. We shouldn't have any cognitive impairment or major cognitive impairment, could safely participate in intervention as assessed by medical history, physical exam, and ECG. Should give informed consent, live in a study area, and does not plan to move. How prevalent is this target population I just defined in the general community? That's a study we conducted a few years ago in the EPIs, Established Populations for Epidemiologic Studies in the Elderly, involving 4 communities in the US, in which in the x-axis is a SPPB, the short physical performance battery score, from 0 to 12. So the more towards the right are highly functioning, towards the left low functioning. The black area shows those who have mobility disability, who are unable to walk for 100 meters. So if you use a selection recruitment of a life study, those who are below 9 but did not have mobility disability, so if it's area that has poor performance or medium performance, above the black area, it's about 30 to 40% of older men and women, 70 to 89, living in the community. So it's highly prevalent. Primary outcome of the study, major mobility disability. We wanted to define inability to walk, but we had to operationalize it objectively. So we have an objective measure, which was defined as inability to walk 400 meters at usual pace on a 20-meter course, so 10 laps of 40 meters each. And here you have an example. Here's at our site at University of Florida, 2 cones. People are asked to walk. There are 2 chairs for safety, so if they need to rest, they're always accompanied by an assessor in case of they lose balance. And the bottom, the smaller side, you see there is a more frail person who uses a cane. So cane was allowed, but no walkers or tripod or other devices. 15 minutes was a limit, was a very long time. We actually, in preliminary studies, have shown that people who fail the walk, they fail it pretty early, between 2 and 6 minutes. They say, I'm tired, I cannot go further. And very few just missed it because they didn't make it in 15 minutes, but make it in 16. It was only a few percent. So it's not just the dichotomizing a continuous variable. It is really a longer cutoff that beyond that doesn't make much sense to continue. No help with a person, and as I mentioned, a cane was available. They could also stop to rest, but not sit. If they sit, they would fail the test. Secondary outcomes included ADL disability, cognitive functions, injurious falls, major mobility disability or death, combined outcome, persistent major mobility disability, which means failing the walk twice in a row. They were tested every 6 months, so if 2 consecutive tests were failed, they reached the secondary outcome. Cost effectiveness, we are also testing, looking at cardiovascular events, pulmonary events, and dementia, mild cognitive impairment. Today, I will present the 2 in orange, the major mobility disability or deaf and persistent. This afternoon at 4 o'clock, there is a presentation also on cognitive function, showing cognitive results. The other analyses are ongoing, so we will not present at this time. The health education, also referred as a successful aging interventions, consisted of health workshops that are relevant to older adults, such as healthful nutrition, how to effectively negotiate the healthcare system, how to travel safely, and what is a recommended screening, etc. No training no information on physical activity was not provided to that group. Also, they received a short instructor-led program, 5 to 10 minutes of gentle stretching and flexibility exercises, and the workshops were given weekly during the first 26 weeks, or during the first 6 months of a trial, and then monthly and bi-monthly was optional. They could come twice a month if they wanted to. The physical activity intervention was center-based in a group setting, twice a week at a center, plus home. The primary intervention was aerobic. It consisted of walking. Very simple, no treadmills. Strength of lower extremity, and I'll show this in a second. Balance exercises, flexibility, and behavioral counseling, group and telephone counseling. It's important, this is not a simple exercise trial, like putting a person on a treadmill for a few weeks or few months and then stop and they revert. The intent was really to modify their lifestyle, and that's why it's a lifestyle intervention trial. Walking was 3 to 6 days per week, twice per week at a center, minimum bouts of 10 minutes with a goal of 30 minutes per bout and then increasing progressively. Strength training was 3 times per week, 10 minutes per session. Intensity was moderate, as measured with a Borg scale, somewhat hard, 12 to 14 on a Borg scale, and strength training slightly higher, 15 to 16, or hard. And here, an example, Wake Forest University walking track. On the right-hand side is the University of Florida walking track. Here is a walking session in Stanford in California. Outdoors, was done primarily outdoors. We did the blood pressure and heart rate safety checks. Balance training, wide leg squat, that's one of the examples of a resistance. Importantly, we did not use any special equipment. No treadmill, no resistance machinery. The only equipment that was used were ankle weights, as you can see here, in order to have an intervention that could be applied in any environment and in any setting. And here is a randomization, randomization that started in March. Well, the recruitment started in February. The first participants were randomized in March 2010 and ended in December 11, ahead of the schedule. The red line is the target. The dotted blue line is the actual, which was always above the target. And the main reason is, of course, we had the great centers highly experienced in recruiting this population, but also because, as I mentioned earlier, this is a highly prevalent population. Here are those, the same curve on those with a short physical performance score, battery score of 7 or less. So the most frail group, again, recruitment was highly successful in that group as well. And here the randomization according to different sites, which was quite homogeneous. All sites were highly successful and ended the trial at target or above target of the recruitment goal. So each site was supposed to recruit 200 participants. And here is a allocation and randomization scheme. We overall screened over the phone 14,831 participants. Those were recruited primarily from mass mailing in the community and advertisements. So it was globally community-based recruitment. Excluded were 13,196, primarily over 4,000 refused. They didn't want to go further in screening because they didn't want to randomize. They just wanted to exercise. Over 2,600 were excluded because they were too highly, their performance level was too high, were too fit, or over 2,400 because they exercised too frequently, and other problems. 600 didn't make the 400-meter walk, so they were already disabled, so they couldn't qualify. And few hours for morbidity. So we didn't have really any disease exclusion except conditions that represented an absolute contraindication to exercise. So we included virtually everyone who qualified for the trial. 818 were randomized to a physical activity intervention, and 117 to health education. And the follow-up for the primary outcome was virtually complete, which is very, very successful. Only 24 people, we had no information for the primary outcome in physical activity, and only 14 in a health education group. And the analysis was complete. We analyzed anyone who was randomized initially, so it's an intention to treat analysis. And here are the baseline characteristics of a cohort. Age, close to 79 years for both groups. Over 2/3 were women. African Americans were slightly more frequent, almost 20% in a physical activity group versus 15% health education. This was the main difference between the two groups. Short physical performance battery score, the averages were 7.4 and 7.3, so highly compromised cohort. 43 and 46% had 8 or below. Below 8 or 7 or below. Walking speed 0.383 or 0.82 meters per second, very slow, which represents, according to normograms I showed earlier, a high-risk population for mortality. Body mass index of 30, so virtually overweight or obese population. Free MSE score was around over 90, so cognitively relatively intact. The prevalence of comorbidities was very high, over 70% hypertension. About a quarter of the population had diabetes, and also cancer was highly prevalent, previous cancer in population. And here is the adherence, which was a major challenge to maintain adherence, was a median 71% at the center-based sessions in the physical activity group, which is pretty close to what previous studies in similar populations have shown in much shorter trials. Given the long-term duration of this study, this is a quite great accomplishment of intervention groups. Health education was higher, 82%. Another challenge we had in the study is intercurrent disease, as this group was at high risk of disability, also high risk of comorbidity and hospitalizations. Almost 60%, 58.6% of participants, at least once, were away from intervention for more than 2 weeks because of various diseases. And there was a program to restart the intervention, so we proactively reintroduced the intervention. Median duration away from intervention and physical activity was 49 days. And about a quarter of the participants, where twice or more were away from the study as well. And here is a self-reported walking, weight training activities in the two groups. The blue line shows the physical activity group, the yellow line, the health education group. As expected, the physical activity was reported higher level of walking and weight training, which was statistically significant across the entire follow-up. This is up to 3 years of follow-up. But also the physical activity group somewhat improved their healthy lifestyle by improving, so showing that it was an active intervention. We also measured physical activity objectively through accelerometry. Every year, but only at year 1 and 2, we don't have 3-year data, we gave them an actigraph accelerometer, which we wore on their belt for a week, and then mailed it back to the center. And here are the data for the first 2 years. Actually, the physical activity, again, good separation of the groups, a good delta in minutes of physical activity, starting from 200. Actually, the physical activity retained over the 2 years, while the health education objectively declined their physical activity as expected with age. And here are the main results. Primary outcome, major mobility disability, was experienced by 532 participants, 32.5% of the population. Persistent mobility disability was about half of it, 17% of all participants experienced this outcome. Highly incident, the frequency was very high, as expected, and as planned from a pilot. And here are the results of major mobility disability. Physical activity group experienced the outcome in 30.1% of the participants. Health education, 35.5% of the participants, over 2.6 years of follow-up. The blue line shows the proportion free of event during 3 years of follow-up. And the yellow line in the physical activity group, the yellow line in health education. As you can see, the curves separate pretty early in the trial. After 6 months, they start to separate, and they remain separate through the entire follow-up. The hazard ratio was 0.82%, statistically significant, which translates in an 18% reduction of the risk of major mobility disability. The number needed to treat to prevent one event was 41 people for 1 year of live participants, 24 people for 2 years, and 18 people for 3 years to prevent one event of major mobility disability. Persistent mobility disability results were even more striking. 28% reduction, hazard ratio of 0.72, and 14.7% of a physical activity group experienced the event, and almost 20% in a health education group. And here again, the curves separate very early in the trial and maintain separate and actually tend to diverge as the trial continues. Combined outcome of major mobility disability of death was very similar to the primary outcome. Hazard ratio of 0.82 and also highly statistically significant. Interesting results are subgroup analysis. This is a kind of busy slide I'll just walk you through. The point estimates on the left-hand side of the line favor physical activity. Anything on the right-hand side favors successful aging or health education group. As you can see, all the point estimates are on the left-hand side. So all subgroups tend to have a favorable benefit for physical activity. According to gender, the first is male and female, Hispanic or others, same thing. Age groups, older people tended to have a slightly higher benefit. History of diabetes, CVD were not much different. But interestingly, those who had a greater benefit, those with low gait speed and those with low physical performance battery score at baseline. So the more frail population is the population who benefited most from the intervention. And actually, if you look at the SPPB, next to the last group, virtually everything happens, all the benefit happens in the more frail group. The higher functioning benefit is there as well, but much less evident. Safety. Initially, we expected to have a lower incidence of serious adverse effects and hospitalizations in a physical activity group, as we would have expected lower level of comorbidity. Actually, the results were in the opposite direction, though not statistically significant. The relative risk of all serious adverse events was 1.08, which was not statistically significant, so did not raise safety issues, but yet was kind of concerning, or we were wondering what was going on. And looking also at hospitalizations, relative risk 1.10, 10% higher, which was not statistically significant. So most of the adverse events were hospitalizations. We analyzed which were the causes, what are the primary reasons for hospitalization. So here are the most frequent. Infection, 30% higher in the physical activity group. Surgery was about the same, slightly lower, but falls, syncope, dizziness, about the same. Many cardiovascular events were higher, such as AFib, heart failure, stroke, coronary syndrome, hemorrhage, fractures. We also looked at the combined cardiovascular, also was higher, but not significant. So we had several hypotheses. We are testing and looking at providing answers. Physical activity may unmask symptoms resulting in earlier detection of underlying subclinical medical conditions. For example, if a participant who has always been sitting, sedentary, immobile, and has a subclinical heart failure, has no symptoms, as this person starts walking, starts experiencing shortness of breath, and may report symptoms that can trigger hospitalization. So uncovering subclinical conditions might be one explanation. Another potential is the stress of exercise in the context of lower homeostatic reserve in people who are frail, vulnerable, may have led to higher risk of adverse events. So we tested this hypothesis, and actually we looked in those with low short physical performance battery, where those who are more frail, actually there the risk was kind of lower than those who are more fit. So really this hypothesis is not confirmed by our data. There may be no causal association, and maybe everything random, whatever we are seeing, as nothing is significant. Or we think this is the most likely explanation, is despite the blinding of assessors, the physical activity group's more frequent contact may have led to a higher rate of recognition of health events and higher overreporting in people who come more frequently to the center. Other symptoms resulting in at least 1 week of restricted activity, there was really no significant data. Actually, falls tended to, as expected, to be lower in the physical activity group, and other symptoms were not different. So, to conclude, the main findings is that the life study involves the most vulnerable older adults who are understudied and who are typically not included in large clinical trials. This makes the life study very unique. The life study demonstrates mobility benefit of a physical activity program in vulnerable older adults, and those at higher risk benefited the most. What are the next steps? We are extending the follow-up to assess the long-term effect of interventions of mobility, disability, free survival, hospitalization, cardiovascular events, cognitive outcomes, and cost effectiveness after people have discontinued the intervention. We are also sharing resources of a life study. As I mentioned, the data will be soon available to anyone who wants to analyze. We have biological samples who are collected serum and plasma at various time points of the trial, urine samples, and DNA samples as well. And thelifestudy.org is a website where you can apply for data and samples. I would like to thank our main sponsors, NIA and NHLBI, for their large grants that made the life study possible. Several other programs, such as the NIA Intramural Research Program, the Pepper Centers from several sites, the CTSIs at several sites, the Boston Rehabilitation Outcome Center at Tufts University, and we are also indebted at our program officials, Evan Hadley, Sergei Romashkin, and Denise Bonds, who led us through that journey. As we talk at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the paper is available online on JAMA, and my take-home message is that among older adults at risk of disability, a structured moderate intensity physical activity program compared to an active intervention or a health education program reduces major mobility disability by 18% and persistent mobility disability by 28%. Thank you very much for your attention. question? Yeah, we're open for questions. Come to a microphone, because otherwise, sure. Wow, we are in face of a definitive studies as no one has questions. Well, yes.
Wonderful study. I have a question about the behavioral counseling. Did you have any theoretical framework that you followed or a certain type of behavioral counseling that you did?
I didn't hear you, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm just not tall enough. The behavioral counseling,
Yes.
did you follow a certain type of theoretical framework or any specific type of behavioral counseling that was consistent across the
I would ask
study
Roger
sites?
Fielding to address this question, probably. He's our expert.
So, I speak for the I speak for the behavioralists involved in this, Abby King and Jack Rajewski, but it was basically the social cognitive theory. We did a lot of goal setting and reinforcement of goals with some rewards. We had a lot of really interesting events during the course of the study, so to motivate people, some intervention campaigns which tried to have participants accumulate distances that they've walked over time. So a lot of reinforcement in that way.
Marco, in this last minute or so, let me extend this gift to you from ACSM and Exercises Medicine, and thank you very much for this presentation this afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, they said that 1 o'clock. Yeah.